Can we start with the Miami Virginia Tech ending? I talked about this a few minutes ago, and yesterday was just such a crazy day with other things that I really didn't get into it. When you work back from the end, how did they overturn a touchdown on the field?
That's a great question. Yeah, isn't this like perfect ACC to some extent?
Yeah.
Like, I think they got it right, but in the most like backwards way possible. It never should have been called a touchdown on the field, and it probably shouldn't have been overturned. In the end, it was probably the right call that we arrived at, and the explanation that the ACC gave afterwards is reasonable, and yet to have actually watched all of those things unfold the way that they did is utterly nonsensical. And look, we can blame that particular officiating crew, which had a horrible game even before that, in my opinion. But part of this is also, I'm just going to get on my soapbox and old man yelling at cloud. Like, this is why I hate replay. And for so many reasons, is that you have these officials who are almost taught, don't make the call that you think happened.
Right.
Make the call that will allow us to go to replay. And then sometimes you get to a replay that just doesn't have the angle to prove anything. There's not a camera angle for absolutely everything. And so I think you have an official that felt obligated to make the touchdown call in order to go and review it, the same way that they're obligated to, let a fumble play out and call it a fumble to go review it. Well, sometimes you can't overdo it. And look, as much as everybody wants to bang on Mario for the Georgia Tech game last year, like that fumble play, they called it a fumble. It was not a fumble, but they didn't have enough to overturn it. This was sort of the opposite. They didn't have enough to overturn it, but they did it anyway to make sure they got to the right point. Because I think everybody in the building knew what the right end point was. But we're getting there, A, because this crew screwed up and should have had an explanation for it on the field afterwards. And didn't. And right. B, just because the whole process of how games are officiated now because of replay, I think is a mess.
See, you basically just said everything I said about 5 minutes ago. So I'm just going to go, I agree 100%.
Yeah, and I like it. I never have these conversations with anyone else. So yeah, I agree with Hale. Like I need more of that.
Perfect. Well, here's some, and I will actually allow if people, because I'm not a conspiracy theorist at all. But I know people who are. So if you wanted to put on your tinfoil hat and say that Jim Phillips picked up the bat phone and he called the command center and said, we need Miami to stay in the top 10. We need them in the top 5. I don't care how you guys get to it, but that is not a touchdown. That is an incomplete pass. Got it? Sure, boss. If I will allow that. I will not tell people they are crazy for thinking that. That's where I was.
I have a sort of a reminder that I offer people. I think this certainly comes up much more in politics than in sports, but I think it's true everywhere, which is that there's a very thin line sometimes between like malevolence and incompetence. And in this case, if you want to ascribe malevolent means, if you want to think there's a conspiracy theory there, the reason that you can do that justifiably is due to incompetence. And sometimes people are just bad at their jobs, and that's unfortunate.
David Hale is joining us here. A David Hale joint on Twitter, ACC reporter for ESPN. Is this the week that Miami gets Cristobal'd at Cal? College game day there. Cal's certainly not a pushover at all. Is it this week or is it next, or in 2 weeks, or actually 3 weeks, I guess, because they have a bye week at Louisville?
Here's the thing. I'm an analytics-based guy. I am just show me the numbers. Show me what's on film. You are what you put on film. That I am a believer in that. And yet, boy, you watch that Virginia Tech game, and it's hard not to get swayed by the vibes. Like, it's hard not to watch that last drive and just the miracles that Cam Ward pulls out of his where, and or to see Xavier Restrepo flat on his back pull in that catch that keeps the drive alive. And it's hard not to watch that and say, like, I don't know, maybe there's something bigger going on here.
Good.
So Miami is a very talented football team. They are not without weaknesses. I don't think Cal is the team best equipped to exploit those weaknesses. I do sort of the late kick is not ideal there. Teams are creatures of habit. This is going to be a challenge, I think, for the coaching staff to prepare them. I am not as worried about this matchup. I do think Louisville is a much tougher one for them. But I don't know. I feel dirty saying this, but I'm kind of sold on Miami. I think could be the year. Now, when I say the year, they're not going to turn into 2001 Miami again.
Right.
People should stop waiting for that. But I think they can win the league this year.
That would be great. I mean, it's been a while. It's been a minute since Miami has won a league. I haven't won this one yet, but it has been a minute. David Hale from ESPN is joining us here. All right, so this week should have been that signature ACC game with Clemson playing at Florida State. It is obviously not a signature game. We did not, like at the beginning of the season, I joked about this with Victoria. If this game was in week 1, Florida State would have been a 10-point favorite over Clemson, and they're more than a 2-touchdown underdog at home to a Clemson team that I still think that people are not 100% sold on offensively. I still think that I'm not sure we want to believe, but there really aren't many marquee games. I think Clemson and Miami don't play a regular season matchup, and Florida State's part of the two best, this one and the game against Miami, but Florida State looks kind of trashy.
More than kinda. I think they're just bad, and of course, you could probably interpret this either way. They're not going to have DJ Uyunglele.
Right.
I think that's probably a good thing because
Yeah.
A, he's played terribly, and B, you don't have the distraction of him going up against his former team, and what all comes with that. But I just, I have thought through much of this very terrible start that Mike Norvell has probably handled things about as well as he could.
Yeah.
I know everybody has their own opinion about what he should have been doing, but I thought he's handled it well. Then I watched that SMU game, and I joked on Twitter, he looks like somebody who just realized he's living in a computer simulation and none of this can be real. Like, he just looked baffled by what was going on around him. And I don't mean that in a he was unprepared way.
Right.
I mean it in he's looking at the world and it is inexplicable. Everything that you believed in, the laws of physics stopped applying. And I don't know how you fix that. Because I believe him when he says this isn't what we look like or practicing like every other day of the week. And I believe him when he says I'm putting guys out there who are talented enough to win. I mean, I'm at Clemson right now. We just finished talking to Dabo Swinney, and he's talking about how, every guy on their Florida State defensive line is going to play on Sundays.
Right.
And on paper, that is true. And then you watch them play, and they are a hot mess. So it is mind-boggling how bad things have gotten there. In some ways, you can say, I get it. DJ wasn't great. Okay, great. I didn't think they were going to have great receivers either. These aren't huge surprises, but that D line is supposed to be elite, and it's not. They were supposed to be able to lean on their O line, and their O line's been terrible. It is just the amount of bad things that have had to happen. I was talking to our colleague Andrea Adelson the other day, and she's like, I don't know, we should have seen the writing on the wall on some of these things. And I'm like, yeah, okay, but there's 10 areas that aren't working out the way that anyone was hoping for. So yeah, you flip a coin and you think you got a 50-50 shot, heads or tails. You flip it 10 times, you don't expect it to come up tails all 10 times, and that's basically what's happened for Florida State.
Yeah, they are objectively bad. All right, so now I want to ask you a question. This is based on, Heather Dinich story, and it's been picked up everywhere. David Hale from ESPN is joining us. And I'm just curious what your opinion of something like this would be, because we haven't seen it yet. It hasn't been finalized. But according to sources in both the Big Ten and the SEC, they're going to ask/demand, because they hold all the cards, 4 automatic bids each to what I'm guessing is a 14-team college football playoff after a couple of years, once we're done with 12 and we go to 14. They're even talking about either minimizing or getting rid of altogether the 13-member selection committee. What are your thoughts on that?
So I'm a big Simpsons fan. Now, I say this not that I've watched any Simpsons in the last 20 years, but
right.
there's an episode from the early 90s that probably doesn't really make sense anymore, but there's a line that Marge has, which is, boy, Fox became a hardcore porn network so slowly I didn't even notice. That is what is happening here. All right, we've been talking about these super leagues that are coming for forever now, and yet we don't understand that, like, it's happening. We're watching it happen right now. It's happening. And while they're not doing it in name, they're not up on the rooftop shouting that this is what they're doing. That's what they're doing. So there are basically three prongs to the business model of college football right now. One is playoff access. Well, they're doing their best to control that as much as they can. Two is revenue. Well, I think we all know where that conversation is. And frankly, they've already capped what other leagues are getting revenue-wise at less than them for the playoff. And three is governance. And one of the other stories that was sort of overlooked over the last week is that they're meeting together, the Big Ten and the SEC, to talk about basically governing their rules themselves without the NCAA, creating their own NIL rules by the conference level. So, like, they're controlling all three of these prongs of how the business model works, and they don't, frankly, really need anybody else. Like, they don't want to take the PR hit that comes with creating super leagues or holding people out. So they'll continue to leave an olive branch out there. But make no mistake, the writing is on the wall. They are moving in their own direction, and you can either follow along and take their scraps or understand it's going to happen.
So here's because you are 100% correct. I contend that the people who run those two leagues in particular, and I would put Brett Yormark, by the way, in the same category. I'm sympathetic to Jim Phillips because I think that he doesn't like anything that is going on in intercollegiate athletics. He just has a job to do. I fully believe he hates what is happening to college sports. But I don't think that Greg Sankey or Tony Petitti or Brett Yormark or the power brokers, I don't think they like college football. I think they love money. I 100% believe what I am saying. I think they love money. They love power. They don't care about the sport. Because the only reason to expand the playoffs, I might be crazy here, I'm not for it, but the only reason to expand the playoffs is to get the best teams in. And they are fundamentally rigging it so the best teams won't. And I don't understand that.
So in their view, you cannot be one of the best teams if you are not in the Big Ten or SEC.
The SEC I get. The Big Ten is trash.
I agree completely. But here's the thing: if you step away from living in the world of college sports,
right,
and look at it from I'm the CEO of Apple or Microsoft or whatever, and just look at it strictly from a business standpoint. For basically all of eternity, it has been the most mismanaged, incomprehensible, ridiculous business model there is. The amount of money they leave on the table, the whole way the whole system works. Like you would teach this in economics classes as this is what's wrong. Don't do it this way. And so there are these massive market inefficiencies within the college sports landscape that I think that some of these guys that have a very business background, and it's certainly true of Yormark and Petitti, look at this and say, I'm doing the Lord's work here by fixing the disaster of a business model that this has been. But, look, if you live within the world of college football, if you've grown up in this, like the disaster is part of the charm, right? The disaster is part of what we like. And so this is really the push and pull of where this is. The game had to modernize, and they fought it for way too long. And so I am in some ways very appreciative of the fact that people like Greg Sankey are progressive in the way that they view things. But I also agree with you wholeheartedly is that their priority is not to maximize fan happiness. It is to maximize the amount of times fans will pull out their wallet and hand over more cash.
Yep. This is really much more big business merger and acquisition than it is competitive sports. But competitive sports or competition is also in those boardrooms. David Hale at a David Hale joint on Twitter. Always fun catching up, man. I look forward to whatever you are writing with regards to Clemson and Florida State, and I appreciate your time.
It's a pleasure as always. Let's do it again soon.
You got it.